Hey all, this is part two, and we're going to loop over an array. So a lot of times you're going to come across a scenario where you have an array and you want to do something to every element in that array. Now you figure that eventually we could start layering in things like if a certain element of an array fits some condition, we should do something. But for now, let's just consider we want to do the same thing to every element in the array. So I'm going to bring this over to our REPL, paste this in, and put in a bunch of like current index, current element, and then context for when each iteration of the loop ends. So here's our array that we're iterating over. Here's an index variable that's going to let us iterate from the first index to the last index. And here's a condition, excuse me, that's going to describe that nicely. Excuse me, sorry about that. The index is going to be incremented each time within the loop. And again, if we forget to do this, or if we set up our condition incorrectly, we'll get an infinite loop. You'll know that happens because it'll get hung. And if it gets hung, quit your browser, open it back up, and pat yourself on the back for having reached a milestone that everybody hits. So if we run this, we're going to see that the first current element is 1, index of 0, and it proceeds nicely through the array. So let's talk about one that's a little bit more, not just an array of numbers. So we've got a series of restaurants, the salad bowl, the steak knife, and the ramen spoon, and an index of 0. So while the index is less than the restaurant's length, we're going to continue iterating. We're going to console.log the value of the restaurants at whatever index we're currently up to, and then we're going to increment the index each time. So if we run this, we should see all of the titles logged nicely to the console. And here's one of those fun moments where it's like, why does it say 2? It's like, well, because that's the last operation that happened, we get 2 back. It was basically index reassigned itself to be a value of, is that what's happening? Index reassigns itself to a value of 2. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure why that's coming back. But we don't really ever need to worry about that. That's not something that we're going to concern ourselves with. So with this in mind, let's go ahead and talk about this coding challenge. We're going to complete a function that takes in one parameter, an array of elements, and logs all of its elements one at a time to the console. Your function should use a while loop to log each element from the beginning to the end of the array, then return nothing. Below is an example of the code running, assuming that you will have completed the described function, loop, and array. So let's grab our function stub. Let's grab our test cases. You're also going to want to keep in mind that the way that you have to write these test cases is rather, it's like a hack. Like we're taking advantage of something that is happening on this test side of things. So be very, very careful about only logging exactly what we say to the console. Otherwise, the test is going to fail, and it might not be a reflection of your code being super incorrect. More just like it's kind of difficult to test console.log messages. At least when you have my what would you call it, pretend programmer version of an understanding of what's going on in the tests. So with that in mind, first thing we're going to do is create an index variable, which if we're iterating over an array, ought to start at 0. Then we're going to create a loop, which iterates over the input array, and we can do that by saying that the index has to be less than the array.length. And the reason we can say that is because we figured out like a couple lessons ago, that if we want the last element in an array, the value of the index is going to be the length of the array minus 1. So if our loop ends at the point where the index becomes equal to the length of the array, making sure that it's less than with the condition, then that's going to let us visit all of the indexes in an array. So with that, we'll say index is less than array.length. Now, in the other examples, I put a space in between here and here. You don't need one. It doesn't really change anything. I just think it's easier to read sometimes. Sometimes it's also not, though. So we want to log the current array element to the console. So we could say console.log array at index. And in 1 second, we're going to show a way to make use of that aliasing thing that we did previously. And then we're going to say index plus plus. So if we run this, we should get A, B, C, D, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We do. One thing that we could do if we wanted to keep track of the current array element is we could say current val is equal to array at index. Now what's actually going to happen, because this variable is inside of the while loop, it's going to recreate this variable each time. So instead of saying array at index, we could say something like current val. Now to be sure, this makes more sense if you have something that you know what is inside of the array. So if the array is an array of users, you could say current user is equal to array at index. But just demonstrating the concept so you get an idea of what's going on. With that in mind, let's take our now completed function back to the input window, run the tests, and we're in good shape. Excellent work, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one.